in a moment, we're going to speak with Syndicated columnist Ruben Navarrette about the way in which the media is covering Black Lives Matter protests, the effort to defund police, and also a little bit about how this might impact 2020. But first, justice, friends, superheroes have to look their best. Do you remember a superhero who wasn't well-groomed? I do. It was Chubby Thor. Odin's son was not representing, and nobody was scruffy man enough to point it out. Don't do that to your superhero dad. With great grooming comes great responsibility. After Dad leaves his fortress of solitude, the bathroom, he wants to come out of his dad cave, having transformed from Shaggy Man to Scruffy Man. Scruffyman.com is your source for Dad's grooming power. Groomers assemble! The beard grooming kit for men. It's got everything you need for daily grooming. The state-of-the-art MK2 razor is made from the same aluminum as the UH-60 Black Hawk helicopter. You'll think Stark himself designed it for your Iron Man. Make sure your superhero dad is Scruffy Man. He'll look better faster than a speeding razor, able to cut through jungles of hair in a single swipe. So log on to scruffyman.com today. You'll get free shipping for all orders over $49, and your gift will arrive quick as a flash in time for Father's Day. Use the promo code Jimmy and Shazam. You'll get an additional 20% off their Father's Day discounts. That's scruffyman.com, and use the promo code Jimmy at checkout. Appreciate our friends and sponsors at scruffyman.com. All right, great to be with you today here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, as always. And it is always as well a pleasure to be joined by Syndicated columnist Ruben Navarrette, who joins us once again here on the show. Ruben, welcome to the program. Good to have you back.
Great to be back with you. Thanks, Jimmy.
So I appreciate your time today. A few weeks have passed since we last had you on, and a heck of a lot has happened. It was coronavirus was the issue of the day. Now everybody's focused on something dramatically different, and coronavirus seems like last year's news almost. So much has happened in the past 2 to 3 weeks. What do you make of this changing dynamic of what we're focusing on now as a country?
Oh, my goodness. It's an amazing thing, right? This is a problem we've had going back decades, some would say since the beginning of the country, in terms of how our police forces handle and our police departments handle their relationship with the African-American community. And this case, this terrible tragedy in Minneapolis involving George Floyd, this 46-year-old black man who had Derek Chauvin, former officer Derek Chauvin's knee on his neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, just lit this fire, Jimmy, just lit this fire around the country and around the world. And it's like we've had all this kindling building up over all these many years, and many of us have never seen anything like this. There's a lot going on that many of us can disapprove of: the looting, the arsons, the crime that's being committed, the attacks on officers, the wounding and killing of innocent officers who weren't involved in this. But there is underneath all that a really legitimate sense of frustration and anger on the part of African Americans and others who think that the police department is not working to their benefit, but actually works to their detriment.
We've gotten to the point now as well, Ruben, where there is a growing push, and we were talking about this with Mike Brest of the Washington Examiner in the last segment, a growing push to defund the police, and there are two different avenues of this. One, and we played a clip earlier as well of Senator Kamala Harris, your senator in California, saying that some money should be reallocated from police departments to other community programs, spend more on education and so forth, although, of course, she uses the word invest more in these programs, which is, of course, the buzzword. But on the other hand, you've got those who don't seem to be strong in number as far as politicians are concerned, elected officials, but who are contending that police departments should be outright dismantled across the country. What do you make of that dynamic?
It's a terrible idea, speaking not just as the son of a former cop who was on the job for 37 years, my father was, but if you think about it, police are there to protect and serve the most vulnerable, the downtrodden, the people who can't afford private security forces in expensive neighborhoods. And that is often African Americans and Latinos. Those are the people who call the police. Now, there is some debate about whether when they call the police, they wish they hadn't, and sometimes they're taught not to call the police and they don't want the police involved. But nonetheless, absent the police, you end up with this law that says basically the stronger people with weapons will control and dominate those who don't have weapons. and the poor and downtrodden, vulnerable members of society will be left to the tender mercies of criminal elements. So it's a terrible idea. I understand where it's coming from because our police departments have become much more well-funded, much more militaristic, much more muscular, and it hasn't always worked to the betterment of society in the process. So I understand where that's coming from, but this is really the ultimate example of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, a baby we still need.
Syndicated columnist Ruben Navarrette, what do you make of the politics of this on the Democratic side? Because you do have Joe Biden trying to make clear that he doesn't want to defund the police in this way, even as I understand now, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez this morning was saying, giving indications that she's not in the same place as Ilhan Omar, one of her fellow squad members on dismantling police departments, Bernie Sanders saying no. But at the same time, they do want some significant reforms that particular advocates for the police say may go too far.
It's a long story. You know, I'm 53 years old now, and it's as old as I am. If you go back to the 1960s, the 1968 convention, there you had a Democratic city in Chicago, the police department under a Democratic-controlled mayor, a Democratic mayor, and you created this attack on protesters there. What happened over the next 50 years was a pendulum swing back and forth with Democrats, where at different times the Democratic Party has vacillated between cracking down on people through things like the 1994 crime bill to mass incarcerate, bring in more people into prison and jails to get the cities under control, to now all of a sudden they've been reborn as something altogether different. So the Democratic Party has shown itself to be very malleable, very willing to give voters whatever voters want at any decade they want it. But I don't think that's the answer, and I don't think they're the answer because they are so incredibly confused here, Jimmy. Let's not lose sight of something. People like Kamala Harris, who in a previous life was the Attorney General of California before she was the senator from here, they helped create the same problem they're now trying to fix. It was Democrats in the 90s who dropped the hammer on crime and created this sense of militaristic police departments, mass incarceration, despair in sentencing, all the like. And so they've got to make up their mind. If you follow the Democratic Party after the last 50 years or so, you're likely to be confused because they're a little bit of everybody. They give everybody a little bit of something, and they keep changing the script depending on what's called for at that given moment.
Well, and we just saw Joe Biden on the screen. Biden was responsible for that early 90s crime bill. Yeah. He's
the architect of the 1994 crime bill, and he went around the country calling it the Biden bill. He basically has bragged about the fact that every piece of anti-crime legislation in the last 30 years has his name on it. And the reason is Joe Biden sees himself as protecting white people from black people. Let me be blunt. The same criticism that gets directed at police departments, that they're there to protect white people from black people. That's what Joe Biden's always been about. This is Lunch Bucket Joe. This is why Barack Obama chose Joe Biden as his running mate in 2008. I mean, you got to pay attention. You got to read the whole story here. Joe Biden, growing up in Scranton, Connecticut, and working in Washington, D.C., has always been there to protect white people from black people. And he put it into law in 1994. And now he wants you to forget all that. He dons a mask, and he goes to George Floyd's funeral, and he pretends that he's not trying to fix a problem that he himself, along with people like Bill Clinton, helped create.
And I do find it very interesting that there are some Democrats who would like to see police departments defunded to the point of even being dismantled, and also don't favor individuals being able to legally carry a firearm, which means then you would have everybody just at the mercy of these particular criminals. So it's just so fascinating to see how this is playing out. But what's also interesting, let's put up, let's just do it as B-roll, Nathan Matoush, but cut 6. This is the Democrats a couple of days ago where they were kneeling, some of the Democratic leaders kneeling in a moment of silence for George Floyd and for the protests in solidarity with Black Lives Matter. But one of the criticisms that they've been getting has been much more that this was more than just a show of solidarity, especially because they were down on their knees for about 8 minutes, that this is more and more them trying to, the idea is sort of genuflecting or bowing before, getting on your knees before the radicals in the movement, because even a lot of Black Lives Matter leaders are saying Black Lives Matter means defund the police.
Right. They're not willing to go all the way. It's so much easier to wear a cloth and put on a show. Where is the media that just a few weeks ago just a couple of weeks ago, was criticizing President Trump for a, quote, photo op in front of St. John's Church holding a Bible. This was the ultimate photo op and stunt by Democrats. There ought to be one rule for everybody and criticize all parties equally when they do the same sort of stunt. And it's unfortunate. I don't think they want to go all the way. I know they don't want to go all the way down this line. And I think that African-American activists are right to call out stunts like this and say, that's not going to be good enough. We're not gullible. We're not going to fall for it. We want more. And where were these same Democrats all these various times over the years where you have other police-involved shootings and crimes? They didn't say anything. You didn't see this kind of outpouring after Ferguson. You didn't see. So I think African-Americans have a right to be really skeptical, and people want real police reform, have a right to be skeptical that the folks you just saw on the screen there are in fact the solution. They look more like the problem.
Again, we're talking with syndicated columnist Ruben Navarrette. Let's talk about the media and how the media is handling this. I want to read a passage from an op-ed by Oliver Darcy for CNN Business, CNN.com. Black Lives Matter movement reshapes the media landscape. And he begins by saying this: the media industry is at another inflection point. In the way the Me Too movement reshaped newsrooms, sparked debate, and purged bad actors from positions of authority, the Black Lives Matter movement is bringing about a similar upheaval by putting questions about race and reporting on the center stage. And then he goes on to talk about several incidents, including ones like the New York Times editor, opinion editor who was fired over the past week, the Philadelphia Inquirer editor who was fired over the past week, particularly in both instances because of articles that they had published amidst all of the Black Lives Matter protests and what have you, different circumstances, of course. We talked about it in the last segment, breaking them down. But what I want to bring up here is I find this to be a very odd comparison, the idea of Me Too movement, where what they've been doing with the Me Too movement, at least in the way that it's been intended in the media landscape, is to push out people who have been accused of engaging in sexual harassment, sexual assault, those kinds of things, who've actually been accused of participating in acts of violence, usually against women, or harassment and words and whatnot, versus this, where it's opinions that are being presented in the public debate. I don't see a comparison between the two.
Yeah. So here's the comparison. It's not so much about the opinion. It's an internal strife, an internal revolt between personalities, between individuals and people. And the same sort of dynamic is at work, the sense that there used to be a way that newsrooms ran, and that now younger people are coming along saying, we don't want to run newsrooms like that anymore. In this case, Mr. Bennett, who lost his job at the New York Times as the opinion editor, as the editorial page editor, was criticized for not reading the op-ed of Tom Cotton before it went to press or to digital press. He was criticized because he sought that opinion out. I don't think he should have been fired. I don't think that the hubbub should have been there over the op-ed in the first place. I think that's what op-ed pages are for. But that personality conflict is really at the heart of it. What Latinos and African Americans, particularly African American journalists, are saying is that the old guard who runs these venerable newspapers is way out of touch with the call of diversity, that they give lip service as good liberals to saying that they want to integrate their newsrooms. They haven't done it in any measurable degree, and to the degree to which they have brought in some young African-American talent, they expect them to be well-behaved and fall in line. So there is kind of a Me Too quality there. It's not about Tom Cotton's opinion in the New York Times. It's about old guard and new guard and different generations approaching journalism in different ways. Now, I must say, I'm more of an old school journo. I believe that you've got to choose. Do you want to be an activist or do you want to be a journalist? You can't be both. Okay. In my job, I'm paid to have opinions. Many reporters, they're not paid to have opinions. They're paid to be objective. I don't think that's a quaint notion. I think that's still good. We should keep that.
Yeah.
But I understand that divide very clearly between the baby boomers who see journalism one way and the young millennials who see it in a whole different way.
So this is an interesting conversation. First, just the point about the cultural distinction here, or the cultural aspects of what's going on between Me Too and Black Lives Matter. I guess in a broad cultural context, I can see the overlap. Although in terms of when you get to the specifics of the Black Lives Matter movement and what the things are and the Me Too and what, I think there are dramatic differences. But to your point about journalism, That one I totally agree. I've never called myself, well, some have called me a journalist. I've been like, no, I'm much too opinionated. I wear my opinions on my sleeve. I've never used the word journalist to describe myself because I am an opinion commentator, and I want people to be very clear on that. There are a lot of folks who are just, trying to hide their opinions, but not really, and they're acting as though you can meld the two very easily, and that is a troubling thing, even for me as a millennial.
I listen to some radio talk show hosts religiously. People like Ben Shapiro, Rush Limbaugh, Hugh Hewitt are my favorite. Of course, Jimmy, my favorite. But there's one person I no longer listen to, and that's Sean Hannity. I got bored listening to Hannity because he was all over the map on journalism. If you asked Hannity and went back over the last couple of years, at various times he called himself a journalist. I'm not a journalist. I'm a journalist. He couldn't make up his mind. The answer is he's not a journalist. He wasn't trained as a journalist. He's not supposed to be objective. People who have opinions and are paid to have opinions for a living, like me and like you and like Hannity, should just admit that and not lay claim to this idea that somehow we're objective. We're not objective, and we don't pretend to be. The public is very confused about this. They're confused on radio shows when they listen to somebody give the news from the newsroom in a straight news, and then they go to a radio talk show host who's got opinion. We've mixed it all together, and we've confused the public. And what these millennials are saying is that they want to push it to a new level and basically say that this idea of objective journalism is quaint. We ought to be able to challenge people when they're lying to you on record. You ought to be able to say you're a liar, you're not telling the truth. The entire system would change. The entire institution is being debated. It's really about the nature of two generations butting heads.
Yeah, I think that's such an interesting observation, especially having been now over 30 years in media, Ruben Navarrette, coming from you. And I agree with that sentiment, even though I haven't been in media, quite as long. But one thing I do want to note is that there are some journalists.
Quite as long.
Yeah. That's right. Maybe a third. If you count my time in Regis Radio and whatnot, about a third of the time actually, as of this year, I've been doing AM radio for a decade this coming September. So just about a third of the time that you've been in media. But I do want to highlight just one example, and we can put up a little bit as B-roll on the screen. Margaret Brennan over at CBS, who hosts Face the Nation, she did an interview with Bill Barr on Sunday. I think she's one example of some more dying breed of journalists who actually do a very fair job and a good job. Like, every time I watch an interview, whether she's with a Democrat or a Republican, she's someone that I look at and I say, she's doing a good job. She's asking tough questions. She's being very clear to be fair in that way while still getting to the heart of the matter.
I agree. There are a few of them out there. It's a very difficult line to walk. You've got to be able to challenge the person in the hot seat without being combative. You've got to be able to call them other inconsistencies or their inaccuracies without making the show about you. And I think that's really what you have to keep in mind. You're not there to debate the person. You're not there to, particularly if you're talking to someone like an elected official. If you feel that strongly as you're interviewing your local congressman, then resign your job as a reporter and run for Congress. So you've got to be able to walk that balance where you're not trying to do that person's job for them or debate them as to how they can best do their job, but still you feel comfortable calling them out on something you think is not right. So what's happening here, again, with this millennial, these young millennials in journalism, they want to discount this idea of objective journalism, and they do want ultimately the newspapers to be more reflective of these very controversial issues and to say that they are categorically opposed to racism, to police violence, to all sorts of things. I think at that point it gets really dangerous. Those should not be the positions of newspapers and newsrooms.
And finally, Ruben Navarrette, let's talk about the 2020 elections. We're seeing a presidential race underway. Joe Biden has now clinched the nomination, although, of course, we still have the official coronation. Whether that's via Zoom or in person is still to be determined. But the polling data is showing improvements for Biden, especially as President Trump just can't get out of his own way, it seems, in terms of his tweets. He started controlling himself in terms of the press conferences, but not so much on the tweets. And I think that's the number one thing that's been hurting him of late. But how do you assess the 2020 implications of the past few weeks now that we're past coronavirus being the top headline every day?
Yeah, so Donald Trump, this was always Donald Trump's election to lose, and he's losing it. He's hurting himself day to day, week to week. And you called it a long time ago, Jimmy. You said on the radio show, you said before, that Donald Trump can't get out of his own way, and the tweets are going to be a problem. It's one thing to use your tweets to attack a political opponent, but when you say that an older man in Buffalo, an 80-year-old man in Buffalo, may be part of some sort of plot to embarrass police in a setup because it looks like he wasn't really hurt when police officers knocked him down, and this is after the county prosecutors already brought charges against the police officers, okay, then you've gone off the rails. And President Trump, when he does things like that, does hurt himself. It also hurts him because nothing, Jimmy, shows incompetence like a lack of control. And whether you're Lyndon Johnson in the 1960s, whether you're Richard Nixon in the early 70s, whether you're George H.W. Bush in the early 90s, once a group of people, an electorate decides that you've lost control, you're not competent anymore, you can't keep order, then you're out. And that's really what's hurt the president more than anything else. The sense that we're enveloped by disorder and by chaos. He's lost control, and forget that he's, mean and all those other things. I mean, the fact that he's incompetent, how much incompetence are we willing to put up with at a moment like this? So well, I think he's done himself great harm.
That we're out of time, but that I disagree with you on in terms of the incompetence piece. I think that the problem for him is one of being blinded by a desire to go after anybody that he can and to provide some sort of countervailing narrative. And in this case, he's trying to spin out this OAN story by targeting an individual American citizen in a tweet. And I cannot condone that in any way, shape, or form. The idea of taking any American, an everyday American, accused of, in this OAN report, of trying to do something with the police, and then who falls back, and we said the video. What happened to his head? It's horrible. And the idea that the President of the United States would actually say that, just, right. I think that's fundamentally wrong.
No, I agree. I mean, this is, again, Donald Trump can do himself a lot of harm. I don't think Joe Biden can beat Donald Trump, but I'm positive that Donald Trump can beat Donald Trump, and he seems determined to do that. So stay tuned.
So, in other words, Donald Trump could be the reason why Joe Biden gets elected. That's what you're suggesting?
That's practically the only thing that can elect Joe Biden at this point. As I said, he has a very spotty record on these issues. People are not enthusiastic about him on the left. He spent most of his years acting as a pro-law enforcement Republican in Democrats' clothing. But Donald Trump just can't stay out of his own way. And again, when you have chaos and incompetence, that does not speak well for you as president, no matter what party you belong to.
The chaos part, that I'll agree with. Ruben Navarrette, syndicated columnist, great to be with you today. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Jimmy.
Once again, Ruben Navarrette, syndicated columnist, joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. You just watched a clip from Jimmy at the Crossroads. Don't miss more engaging, intelligent talk. Subscribe to the Jimmy at the Crossroads YouTube channel today. You want to catch our live show, and I love your support.
I got Jimmy at the Crossroads, making sense out of no sense. Yeah.